Hello, this is the Ancient History video for Monday, October 12th, 2020. And we will bring this over there. I don't need to know where the rebel plants are. Okay.
Why are you Vadering?
Well, whenever I have to wear a mask, I might as well wear a mask with the best of them. That would be Darth Vader.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what we have done up until now is we have gone over an overview of human history from the prophet Abraham up to the present day, focused on the background to the terror attacks of 9/11, 2001. And then we have gone through a series of speculations as to the nature of reality as explored through creation myths. Now we're going to view our own society's creation myth. How can you call it a creation myth? It's science! Oh, science! You're so brilliant! How can we possibly even question you? Well, if you knew anything about science, you would know that that kind of attitude is unscientific. In fact, science that is not understood, I'll quote Stevie Wonder from the song Superstition. If you believe in things that you don't understand, then you'll suffer. And most people don't understand the science behind scientific theory. And most people also don't understand that science does not deal in dogma. It does not deal in proven facts that can't be questioned. It deals in theories and hypotheses. You have a hypothesis, you come up with a way of testing it experimentally, you go through your experiments, and you go where the data leads you. But whatever you conclude is a provisional theory. It ain't fact. It ain't truth. It is a provisional theory. And yet, even in the presidential and vice presidential debates, and in the political campaigns in general, people are talking about, well, that's just science. If you don't believe in science, you must be some kind of medieval rube and ignoramus. To which I say, nuts. No side, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, progressive, libertarian, has a monopoly on scientific truth, because scientific truth is not about politics. Scientific truth is about drawing conclusions about observable phenomena so that we might understand the natural world. When you apply scientific methods to human beings, you're dealing with something that can't really be measured properly. Because when you heat water or cool it, in order to learn what happens when you heat water beyond a certain point or cool it beyond a certain point, spoiler alert, it becomes either gaseous or solid, the water doesn't have a choice. But being human, we have a choice. That is why, though I teach history and I'm the head of the social studies department, I can tell you that most of the social studies, which apply scientific methodology to understand people, I consider to be absolute hogwash. Because human beings, being possessed of free will, don't react passively or predictably. We make choices. We have our own set of priorities. And those priorities are not always easy to understand, even by ourselves. How many times have you done things that you have no freaking idea why you're doing them, but you really, really feel you should do them? We're complicated creatures. That's another reason why I'm afraid of AI. Because AI is not complicated. AI is very logical and very simple. And not one of us could stand up under the scrutiny of an AI's judgment about how we live our lives. You want an idea? Go back to the story of Lilith and the angels. and the story of how they looked at human beings as a waste of a soul, and look at the way we use our lives. In fact, I'm going to probably play a song that deals with a little of that later. Maybe, if I have time. Yes?
I thought Lilith was the woman who got created from the dust.
Yeah. But Lilith ends up objecting to God's hierarchy of men over women, and therefore she gets to live with the demons.
Okay, I thought you were talking about the other guy.
Yeah, no. The angel, Samael, didn't like that we were made of dust because he thought it was a waste. In any event, my point is this. So many people today deal with science superstitiously, and they try to find truth in it. Oh, you disagree with me about this or that environmental policy. You're a climate change denier, equating that to Holocaust denial. Well, I knew people who lived through the Holocaust, and they knew people who died. Plenty of them. Disagreeing about how and what changes in our climate means and what we should do about it is not the equivalent to denying one of the greatest genocides in human history. But some people would have it so because it's politically convenient. Science and religion are different. But a lot of people today seem to be trying to make religion out of science. Thus, as I hand out your work and talk to you, I'm going to be wearing a mask. Because God forbid I don't. Even though my belief is that the mask is completely ineffective when it comes to dealing with something as small as the virus. I believe that it's purely symbolic theater. But we've had people be killed and beaten and assaulted in our country within the last few months because they didn't wear a mask in public and somebody went bug nuts. We've also had people react with violence, and I don't think anyone died, but maybe I'm wrong, because they were told to wear a mask by somebody and they didn't want to. So, are masks effective? Maybe. Are we going to be convinced because we're told by the government you'd better do by what you're told? Convinced? No. We may comply or not as an act of civil protest, but I can tell you that all logic goes out the window when you say, well, in the name of social distancing, we can't have churches and synagogues open, but we can have protests and riots and insurrections in the name of Black Lives Matter. No. Either all of these gatherings are dangerous and we shouldn't have them, or they're not. And we should, or we should have them under certain guidelines. But it is logically impossible to defend the idea that BLM protests are okay, but church organizations are not. Yes, and then yes.
There's a difference between the two. Church protests, whereas Black Lives Matter is protesting and the murders of people because of the color of their skin. And I've seen the protests. I have family members who've been to the protests. That everyone was social distancing.
Well, then your family were lucky, because the video I've seen on these things, and I've seen them for months, because the protests have gone on for months, have shown riots, have shown mobs, and they're available. You can see them on the news. But I'm glad that there are some places where they are socially distancing. I would also point out that the virus could not care less what the gathering is about.
No, I'm saying there's a difference between going to a place to worship your religion and then protesting. There's a different level of severity between the two on what needs to be.
I don't know quite what you're saying. Can I give you an opportunity to expound?
There's a different level of importance. It's like you're protesting the murder of people, and you're practicing a religion. Well, even though some people may be devout, you don't have to be in a church to do it. And these people it's not the same as murder.
I will respectfully disagree with your very well expressed opinion. I do not think that it's equivalent. I would argue that protesting murder is much less important than worshiping a God that you believe is the author of life. And in America, we can have this freedom to disagree. My point isn't to slam BLM protests. My point is to slam politicians who, on the one hand, say it's okay to gather for protests, but it's not okay to gather for worship. I would respect anyone, and I do respect anyone of either party, who argues that either both are okay or neither are okay. But I don't accept the logic of one being okay and the other not, I don't see, they're both gatherings. And whether there's social distancing or not, they're both gatherings. And sure, houses of worship can do social, and have, and are doing social distancing as well. But we can agree to disagree. And that's America. I'm going to hand out things as I go. Yes, Zoe, thank you for waiting.
Uh, so I personally like I am more like having like the whole raise awareness thing. Like I'm not like just part of like the whole movement, but
Mhm.
my main thing is that I keep feeling I always felt off about when
Go on.
I always felt off about the protest starting because I mean as much as I do think that it isn't just for this to be happening, I feel like blaming like all these like young like college students and kids for having like all these outlandish things, or like a whole ton of other people who are social distancing. Yet no one acknowledges the fact that even though the process is for a good thing, it kind of feels like it's part of the problem. Because I've seen like a lot of protests that aren't socially distanced. There are ones where like people aren't even wearing masks. So I feel like the protests also deserve a bit of the blame for the corona spread.
I think that that's reasonable. But again, we can agree to disagree on details. Sure.
I agree with the fact that the protests that aren't socially distancing and that have become riots are a problem. However, what I don't agree with is like what the media's been showing is that all the protests have been turning into riots. None of them have been socially distancing. Like all of them have been going crazy. That is completely and utterly false. In fact, very few of them turned into riots. And Seattle was shown as having like riots every day. That's false. I lived like 4 blocks away from where the protests were
Were you in the
happening,
chop
and
zone?
there was two total riots.
Were you in the chop zone? The area that anarchists
I
said
lived
they
like
took
four
over?
blocks away from it.
Okay. Would you call that a peaceful protest?
I
Or-
don't call riots peaceful protests, but the rioting, but I'm saying like the very few of it turned into which is completely opposite of what the
Okay, so you think it's unrepresentative what the media is showing?
Exactly.
Yeah, the media does that. The media does. Ava, where are you? Ava.
Oh, and Elizabeth's been raising her hand since I started talking.
I know.
I also
No, Elizabeth's next, and then we're going to Summer.
With what Tali was saying, I do personally believe that the Black Lives Matter protest is a lot more important than preaching your religion, because
Okay, before we go on, do you acknowledge that that's a personal judgment?
Yes, I do acknowledge
Okay,
that's a
fine,
personal
fair
judgment.
enough. As long as you acknowledge that,
Yeah,
the subjectivity of that,
I'm 100% aware that is just how I view it. I do view it as more important.
Okay.
But I believe that one of the reasons why I see it as more important is not only did we import people from Africa or take them from their homes to bring them here.
Our ancestors may
Our
have,
ancestors did, but even then, even after Black people began to gain rights back, we still mistreated them, and that didn't stop.
Exactly.
And it's been like maybe 200 years, with us not treating them as slaves anymore, although like seeing them as pieces of property has slowly dissipated, does not mean that we don't mistreat them still. And the Black Lives Matter protest, it's not like people will sometimes say all lives matter. That idea is not that all lives matter, all lives don't matter. It's that all lives can't matter until Black lives matter too, because we mistreat them. We've mistreated Black people for centuries.
You express that point of view well, but I will point out that is one reading of history that's not objectively true. Objectively, yes, there is a mixed bag. The Europeans, Spanish and Portuguese, started it, who brought people over here, were looking to replace the Indians who made lousy serfs and slaves on their plantations. So they brought in people from Africa, in imitation, I will point out, of the Arabs, who still use black African slaves to this day, and not in any kind of badly treated. I'm talking overt slavery in Saudi Arabia, number one. Number two, it is also true that in the United States we've had several Great Awakenings. And these Great Awakenings included those motives that led to the American Revolution. The reason Thomas Jefferson did not include life, liberty, and property in the Declaration of Independence is that he did not want slave owners to use that as a defense for the institution of slavery. Thomas Jefferson, Democrat and slave owner, wanted to get rid of slavery in 1776. But it was made clear by the representatives of Georgia and South Carolina that the alliance would shatter and that Britain would win the Revolutionary War. We then have decades of abolitionist movement in the North and some in the South, where people risked their lives to help slaves escape in the Underground Railroad, to buy slaves legally, and to otherwise allow manumitted blacks to live in the North. I know this because the only relatives of mine that were in this country before 1900 were Vermont Congregationalists who both fought in the Civil War on the side of the North and before that were abolitionists. So don't anyone try connecting me with slavery. I don't buy collective guilt. I think that's profoundly unjust and un-American. We then fight the bloodiest war in our history to keep the Union together and to set other men free. What I'm doing is I'm telling the other side of the same events. We fight that war. We win that war at, again, great cost. And what do we do after that? The radical Republicans establish, after the Civil War, laws that are very modern. We have black congressmen from districts where black majorities exist. But can you keep an army of occupation in the American South perpetually? The answer was no. So as the 1870s worked on, more and more federal troops were withdrawn and self-government was restored. As self-government was restored, segregationist politicians, along with their illegal cohorts in the KKK, both terrorized the blacks and disenfranchised them. We have the establishment of Jim Crow. We then flash forward. Our military and our federal institutions are still integrated until Woodrow Wilson, progressive Democrat par excellence, segregates the military because he has Southern attitudes about life, and so the military is split into black and white again, something that hadn't happened since the time of the Civil War. After World War II, at a point of peak prosperity, what do? We look at ourselves as a society and say that we are unjust. We then rip ourselves apart, causing our cities to burn, protests. I remember growing up in the wreckage of the Bronx after the race riots of the 1960s and early 70s. And it was like Berlin 1945. Why? Because people were protesting against racial injustice. And what do we get from that? The Civil Rights Act of 1964. Signed in the Senate Republican leader's office by a Democrat president, Lyndon Johnson. It is illegal to discriminate, and has been to discriminate in this country since the year before I was born. Now, is there still tribalism? Is there still racism? Absolutely yes. Is it limited to white people against black people? Absolutely not. You try going, you who are not black, to a largely black area and see how you're treated. There are racists of all colors, and the notion that whites are uniquely guilty of racism, to me, defies reality. Our goal should not be, in my judgment, a reparations society. Our goal should be a colorblind society. The real reason that BLM exists is because there are bad cops who do bad things, but they do not represent the majority of police. The question is, if civil rights was achieved in 1964, why is there still a radical imbalance in poverty and crime between the black community and the rest of the country? And the answer is either we have institutional racism that needs to be addressed, which some of you believe, I don't, or the answer is that for a variety of reasons, not enough people took advantage of the opportunities that freedom provided after 1965. And the result is that you have a perpetuation of crime in communities that wouldn't exist if it wasn't for welfare. The concentrations of black and minority people in urban areas with no jobs would not exist without the welfare programs that President Johnson also set up. So, is there racial inequality? Yes. Is it because of evil white supremacists? I don't think so. But that's an opinion. The point that I was originally raising, though, and I've tried giving you, and I will give you both, and anyone else who wants to talk, and you had your hand up, so you're going to actually go next. The point of this was to say that it is logically indefensible to argue that disease should prevent churches from meeting, but at the same time, disease doesn't matter when it comes to having protests. I wouldn't care if the protests were about the Easter Bunny. My point is, mass gatherings are either a problem on a pharmacological level and on an epidemiological level, or they are not. It has nothing to do with the morality or reason behind it. but we have strayed into it. So I'll take your point, and then we'll come back.
It was just a story about how I was in the airport, masks, and the flight attendants would come right up in your face without a mask, and we got treated poorly, and just
God.
things like that. And
Were they punishing you for wearing or not for wearing?
I was,
Or
like,
were they just being hypocrites?
both, everything. They were just like, I had 4 flights in total, and I was sitting there and I was eating, but I had my stuff right here, and I was watching a movie, and I was like chewing, but I was like also watching the movie, and she yelled at me. She's like, "Put your mask on." I'm like, "I'm chewing right now." She's like, "Yeah, but your mask can still be on."
Okay, that's
I'm like,
insane. That's
I'm
like the
sorry.
governor of California's office arguing that you should put your mask on between bites. Okay. I had said Zoe, boom, boom, and I'm going to go Zoe,
Boom.
Miss Owens, and Miss Smith. Zoe.
Okay. Yeah. So. Okay. Okay. So.
Be brief though,
I know.
because we have taken a lot more time
I know.
than
So.
expected.
I know. So one of the things that I also have had that I've heard seen a lot of stuff on the news, like crowded churches and how it's like
Yes.
it's like a big problem.
What's your point?
My point is that the churches also aren't all doing not all churches are causing that same problem, like how
Yeah, some churches
yeah.
are doing the recommendations, some are not.
In conclusion, I think we can all agree on this. The news is making everything out to be worse than it is.
Yes, and that's what the media
Everything's
does, and it sells a lot of advertisements. Yes.
I think we can all agree.
Essentially, what it says is that you can practice your worship in any place where you feel comfortable. You don't specifically have to be around a bunch of other people. They even have live streams on YouTube of different churches.
Depends on your faith. There are some faiths that believe in sacred ground and hallowed altars and things like that.
Yes, but also my mom's partner happens to be a black man, and he was born in 1972, and he was still deeply segregated. Then he was beat up by a lot of different people, and he's a very smart person. Like, he's somebody I really look up to. He's really interesting, and he's a really good photographist. But however, I've seen firsthand how he gets treated in stores and whatnot. I literally went to a store with him to go birthday shopping for my sister.
Yep.
And a woman, like 3 women that very clearly worked there, followed us around the store for about 30 minutes just to make sure that he wasn't stealing
That's
anything.
obnoxious. My best friend married a woman who came over from China just before Tiananmen Square. They grew up, they're raising their family in upstate New York, very, very lily white area. She's Chinese, fully Chinese. The children are half-bloods, and they are treated the same way. In fact, in his senior year, last year, my nephew, who was the star of their baseball team, was literally taken out and beaten up by a group of people who were resentful of his talent, were resentful of the fact that he was going to college, and they called him a dirty chink. Racism is ugly no matter from whom and to whom it happens. And honestly, I think it's foolish to compare whose racism is the worst. I think that all racism is bad. I think that the blacks have a unique history in this country, so do American Indians. But Jews have a unique history worldwide. And they have suffered over a longer period of time and more consistently than any other group. But it doesn't matter. If somebody doesn't like you because you wear glasses and they're an anti-oculist, it's still obnoxious and it's still unjust. I don't say that's not. I just don't think government policy gets that done. I think that changing people's hearts gets that done. But you said, I said. Do you have anything else?
Well, I do think that the protests in themselves they're really there to help bring more knowledge to what's been going on for centuries. Just is like what happened to Breonna Taylor. We don't really talk about what happened, but there is a thought that there was something going on in her home. But even then, even if that was true, 3 off-duty policemen broke into her home and shot her 3 times in the chest.
Were they shot at
her.
First?
Who
Yes.
they shoot at first? They shot at her boyfriend first, but he only shot at them.
Have you ever been in a life or death situation? I'm not trying
Yes,
to be a jerk. I have too. And I can tell you, the adrenaline pumps. In a case like that, the reason that she and others were shot is because the police have semi-automatic pistols. In the old days, they had revolvers. That means when you're panic firing, at most you can fire 5 or 6 rounds, and then you've got to reload a revolver, which takes your mind out of it. Today, we have automatic pistols, and we do for a reason. The criminals have automatic weapons. So you panic fire, boom, 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 slap, click, and you start shooting again. So the massive number of shots is not indicative of thoughtful, precise fire. It's indicative of panic fire. I'm not saying what happened to her is right. I'm not. I'm saying that there are reasons why the jury chose not to prosecute those officers. And those reasons are not necessarily Whitey is bad and racist all the time. There may be individual cases where people are being judged by the mob unfairly. And unfortunately, that includes police officers as well as black people. Judging anyone by the color, I think, is the mistake. But and what happened to her seems bad, it's being taken care of and it's being investigated. Hopefully, if there are guilty parties, they will be brought to justice, and if there are bad policies, they will be revised. But taking people who are not guilty of crimes, who happen to do things which turn out bad, by accident, no, I'm not even going to say by accident, by mistake. Any person in any job, including brain surgeons, are allowed a certain latitude. Otherwise, no brain surgeon would ever cut open a skull, because there's a possibility of making a mistake and making an error. My sight in my left eye was taken from me by a doctor who made a mistake. He was never sued. He never had to pay $1 in damages. It's just what happened. I come from a family of police as well as teachers. Maybe I have too much sympathy for the police. But to put on a uniform every day and to go into unknown after unknown after unknown, when somebody starts shooting at you, I can understand people firing back.
I personally understand the high stress situation. I come from a family of police officers and firemen. My grandfather was the police chief for many years. No, not the police chief, the fire chief for many years.
Mm-hmm.
He retired a while ago, but here's the thing. I understand that high stress situation, as I almost had to watch my father attempt to kill my big sister about 3 different times because he was a very violent person.
Okay. Let's try to keep specific names.
It is very high stress.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that, but even then, they still broke into her home when they didn't really even have reason to be there.
It needs to be investigated.
It does need to be investigated.
The
fact that it hasn't, but the fact that those men haven't been prosecuted yet, or that or that the people haven't really cared enough to figure out what exactly happened yet.
Given the amount of damage, I'm not sure it's that they don't care. It may be that they've come to conclusions that the crowd doesn't agree with.
Some people have taken false information and twisted it to make it seem differently, such as saying that maybe Brianna's boyfriend was a criminal or that she had done something wrong. But I've heard many different people argue that. Even my big sisters argued that, but I don't believe that that's true because even then she was an EMT and she was off duty and sleeping, and they still broke into her home and killed her.
Well
and
said.
She had no chance to save herself. She was killed instantly.
Indeed.
There's nothing she could do about it.
Indeed. I'm not going to gainsay anything you just said. It's true. Last one.
I'd also like to point out that systematic racism doesn't exist. It doesn't matter if you don't believe in it. It does exist. It is there.
That's a statement of faith. It's a statement of opinion. You believe that it exists.
You look at the differences in salary or how people are portrayed in the media. If you're a woman, you get paid less than a man. If you're a minority, you get paid less than a white person.
There are reasons for that. What I'm saying, Talia, I'm not saying you're wrong. Those things are true. I'm saying it may not be because of an ism. It may not be because of a racism or a sexism. There may be other things involved. And to call it systematic racism, there has to be something that absolutely doesn't exist. There has to be a legal basis for it. The Nuremberg laws of 1936 in Germany legally separate Jews from the rest of society. The Jim Crow laws in the South did the same thing. The laws regarding the sexes did the same thing before the women's liberation movement of the 1970s. There was a legal basis. You cannot argue systematic racism when the system prevents racism. There may be cultural connections, there may be a cultural tendency, there may be all sorts of things that you and I can disagree with about. But to say that it's systematic implies government involvement, and the government cannot do that, not since 1964.
It's all, as I said, it's also about how they're portrayed in the media. For example, Breonna Taylor, after she was shot and her killers were only charged with the shots that missed her, people were like, her boyfriend had drugs on him. Whereas when a white supremacist went to a Black Lives Matter protest and killed 3 people, the media posted a picture of him cleaning graffiti. It's a clear difference, and it's a great inequality.
That would be a cultural tendency, and I agree with you. I actually agree with you on that one. I think there are differences in the way people are portrayed, but the media are private companies. It's not government policy. I agree with you that there are different tendencies. based on how you look. And that's as much agreement as I can get. I am saying that what you're saying, you are reacting to genuine things. To call it systematic to me involves government policy. But, last word.
And as I was saying before, you can't argue that just because there's no more or like legal segregation, there's no more legal slavery, that people aren't still greatly oppressed. I've had friends tell me that they went shopping with their parents for their birthday, and then they were literally had to leave all of their bags behind the counter just because of the color of their skin. I've witnessed it firsthand. You can't argue that it doesn't exist. You can't argue that people don't still participate in it, because the fact is people still experience great racism, despite the fact that there is no segregation. People still will argue, and people still argue that race. And I agree that racism does exist in every race, every culture, and that's a great issue of us versus them, that humans as species need to overcome. But you can't. But racism. But racism still does exist. And you can't argue, no matter how way you try to. It doesn't.
I agree. It does still exist. Absolutely, I agree. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for listening. You may wonder why the heck I spent so much time on this. It certainly wasn't my plan. But if we can't talk honestly about what we think and what we believe, what we in our heart know to be true, and disagree, then America doesn't work. I believe it does. And I believe that the way it keeps working is for us to have difficult conversations when they come up. I will not always be open to changing my plans in this way. But this happened. I think it was a decent conversation. Decent conversation isn't where you persuade the other person that you're right. A decent conversation, I think, is where both sides get a chance to express their ideas thoughtfully and eloquently without too much pressure. I hope that we achieve that here. And I hope that you will think about it. Anyway, I'm going to go on with the lesson, because that's kind of important too, where we come from. And Natal, where are you? Okay. The creation myth that we have is something that I call a myth, Mira, because most people really, Claudia?
She's not here.
Well, she's not here, right? Because most people don't understand it. They don't understand the science of it, Maddie? Okay. And therefore it's a superstition. Yes. Miss Dave.
Well, I was racist.
What?
I was racist.
Oh, I thought you were. Okay, Mira. Clayton. So, our creation myth. Where's Anna? Okay. Is this yours? Because I gave you credit for it.
Yes.
I think it was with your stuff. Okay, good. That's true. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me. That's great. Summer. Here. I'll do that hopefully tomorrow, not today. Our creation myth comes from science. And what it is a combination of Big Bang physics and biological evolution. So we begin. What existed before the universe? What exists now outside of the universe? The answer is, we don't have a bleeping clue. It could be cotton candy for all we know. What it isn't is empty space. Because empty space, as we understand it, is part of the fabric of space and time. And the fabric of space and time is what makes our universe our universe. So there was something before, probably, and there is something outside, probably, this thing we call our universe. What contemporary scientists believe, where's Ava again?
Okay.
Thank you. What contemporary scientists believe is that somewhere around 14,500 million years ago, with no apparent precursor or cause in this universe. Bing! Boom! Now, bing is the first moment. Ellie? Where are you? Ellie. Mouse go. Not here. No. The bing! Did I miss her? She's not here.
Yeah, no, her and Claudia would sit over there, but they're not. Neither of them are in substance today.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Imagine our universe in a single geometrical point. A single geometrical point. Now, how big is a geometrical point? You math people, Anna?
No, this isn't mine.
Okay. Then cross out the name and I'll show it around. While you're there, though, tell me how big a geometrical point is.
Geometrical point? Isn't it like infinitely small?
Yeah. A geometrical point is a location without space, a location without mass, a location without any kind of dimension displaced. It is a simple location. In other words, it is the smallest thing we can possibly conceive of. In fact, it's not even really a thing. It's a concept. It is a location. A geometrical point being infinitely small, that's the first thing that appears. It is the beginning of the boom. And when the boom happens, everything that exists, that is, was, or ever shall exist, is within that explosion. Just as when that first dot appeared, the potentiality for everything that is, was, or ever shall be is in that geometrical point. To imagine the first moments of the universe is to imagine something that is completely unlike anything we have had thus far in our lives, anything that we have directly experienced. It is what I would call an era of solid light. You know how there is space between protons and neutrons that make up the nucleus of an atom, and electrons that make up the shell of the atom? Well, there wouldn't be that space. I can't explain it. I can't describe it. I'm just telling you. The earliest moments of the universe was an infinitely solid, infinitely bright, infinitely energetic, or nearly infinite in all three of those ways, explosion. And what has happened since then is the proportion of the universe that is solid and the proportion of the universe that is empty has reversed and has been since reversing too. Even with dark matter, the vast majority of the universe is now empty. In fact, the belief that scientists have is that we are still inside an expanding explosion, that the universe is still expanding, but expanding in all dimensions. What that means is that the expansion includes the space between protons and neutrons in the atomic nucleus and the electron shell that makes up the shell, as well as space between atoms, between molecules. Everything is getting bigger, including our instruments of measurement. We don't know at what rate because we have no way of measuring it because there's nothing objective that we can use to compare it against. But the redshifts that exist at the edge of our ability to detect in the sky indicates that we're still in an expanding universe. Things are moving away from us at very great speed. Now, where will the universe end, since we're looking at the beginning, as our current creation myth says? Well, there are those that believe it will end in cold entropy. In other words, that the expansion will continue until nothing can relate to anything else, because it has just spread out into an effective atomic, particleized, subatomic particle nothingness. That's a depressing thought. There are others who rather poetically believe in the Big Bang leading to a moment of maximum expansion and then a big crush, where the universe slowly impacts and compacts and returns to a single point. String theory, which has had its ups and downs over the last 20 years, asserts that this may be one of who knows how many universes that have been born in a big bang and then ended in entropy or ended in a big crush or just winked out of existence or apotheosized into a god. We don't know. What we do know is that our universe is about 14.5 billion, that's 1,000 million years old. And at first, you have this solid light, and then the first open spots of spaces appear a bit like in the Chinese creation myth. And then the proportion of the universe is solid and the proportion of the universe that's empty switch. And then you have a universe filled with expanding plasmatic dust. Now, there are some forces, basic forces at work in the universe. There are two that are opposite, gravity and inertia. Inertia is the Newtonian tendency, once you're moving in a particular direction and at a particular speed, to keep moving in that particular direction and speed until something interferes with you. So, if you were in deep space without any gravitic effects and you took a golf ball and went, that golf ball would continue on the trajectory that you had established for it until it came under the influence of a gravity well, and then it would get sucked in. How to explain gravity? Imagine, this is an Einsteinian idea, that the universe of space and time is a sheet held tautly by dozens of people. So everyone's on the end of this big sheet, and it's flat as flat can be, because we're all pulling on it just to the limit of the fabric's ability to stay cohesive. And then somebody takes a pea and drops a pea on part of it. Well, what happens? That part of the sheet is going to slightly dimple because of the mass of the pea. What if somebody else, a real jerk, were to take a bowling ball and wing it into the center of the sheet? What would happen? Well, what would happen is the sheet would tear, or the sheet would dimple big way downward because bowling balls are heavy. And everyone around the edge would go tug and get tugged in towards the center. I like to think of it as, and maybe this is old-fashioned Newtonian of me, matter is lonely and likes company. So, if I'm floating in the universe, a single particle of matter, and I see or sense there's another particle of matter, what will happen is we will tend to drift towards one another and we will tend to clump together. Now, this is true. In space, we each have a gravity field. And our gravity field, depending upon the level of background gravity, is enough to bring things together if their inertia isn't so great as to keep them apart. So matter gets lonely and it tends to come together and hug. What Einstein would say is that the gravity dimple of the bowling ball is like a star. The gravity dimple of a pea is like a meteor. Planets are somewhere in between. And if you're in the dimple, you're sort of rolling around the edge of the dimple. When something is in orbit, the factors of gravity and inertia are very well balanced. Our moon is falling towards the center of the Earth right now at an incredibly fast rate. But at the same time, the moon is trying to shoot directly off into the universe, out into space, because of its inertia. Those two forces are balanced in such a way that the moon's course is neither towards the center of the Earth nor out into deep space, but around the Earth in a predictable fashion. And the moon has been around since very, 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 very long ago. The moon is farther away than it used to be, and it will continue getting farther away slowly. But the moon is still there, following that predictable course, just as the Earth is orbiting the sun. Any orbit is a balance of gravity and inertia. By the way, those of you who are science office oriented can see why I'm not a science teacher. In any event, 11 or 12 billion years ago, you've got gravity beginning to cause a dust cloud to cohere and to form and to press, and the various parts are rubbing against one another more and harder and heavier and more and higher pressure and more. Boom! What happens is gravity ignites the dust. The first star is born. The first star is born, and then Other dust clouds ignite as gravity brings their mass to a critical point of combustion and ignition. So stars begin to appear across the universe. But stars exist in gravity as well. So they begin to clump together. And these clumps of stars, sometimes helped along by, I don't know, remember when the bowling ball tore through the sheet rather than dimpled it? That's a black hole, a hypermass. Something so big that the laws of space and time break down, something so heavy that light itself cannot escape. The edge of a black hole is where light's no longer able to escape. And it's called a black hole because we can't see anything because light can't escape. We can't look into it. Why is our galaxy, which formed around 10 billion years ago, 10,000 million years ago, a swirl? Why is it a shape like this, a lenticular swirl? What's at the center of our galaxy? Oh, astrophysically literate people. Yes, sir.
A black hole.
A black hole. In fact, a giant supermassive black hole is what we think. In other words, it's not a surprise that our particular island universe, this galaxy that we live in, looks like water going around a drain. Because it is. In the center of our galaxy is a giant slurping hole. And all of the stars that have been trapped in our galaxy are facing the same thing that our moon is. On the one hand, they're being sucked towards the direct center. On the other hand, their inertia is causing them to want to fly into intergalactic space, and they are in balance. But the balance favors the black hole. Sooner or later, everything in the galaxy should be swallowed by this black hole. Except, space is more complicated than even that. There's another galaxy, the Andromeda Galaxy. It's about twice as large as ours. And the Andromeda Galaxy looks like a star to the naked eye, but it's an entire island universe like our galaxy, only bigger. And it's on an intercept course with the Milky Way. And when they collide, it's not like two worlds colliding, shattering. What will happen is the gravitic forces that hold both galaxies together will go. And then our two galaxies' central hypermasses will orbit one another, forming a new galaxy. But as these two galaxies come together, there will be massive stellar destruction, massive explosions, suns will be ripped apart, others will collide. And if the sun is still around at that point, the likelihood of the Earth and the other planets still relating to it is small. So sooner or later, not only will the world be destroyed when the sun goes nova, but sooner or later the very galaxy that we're in will be destroyed when the two galaxies combine. And eventually the black hole of Andromeda will swallow up our galaxy's black hole. And then it'll just be one galaxy again. Until it runs into another. In any case, space is big. Really big. I showed you the Power of Tens movie at the beginning of the year. And that gives you some small indication of how big things are. Now we come to the story of our local area. And I guess I'll leave it there. And for those of you at home, bye. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you have questions or comments, bring them in tomorrow or send me an email.